like each other.
Welcome back. We just had to look at our itinerary and figure out what we said this section was about. We've called this section "What do we mean by logic?" We've called this the logic of freedom. And like Dave was saying earlier, we have different meanings as individuals of what words mean to us. So we wanted to say, what do we mean when we're talking about logic, and why have we used that word? So I'm going to say a little bit about what it means for me and why I came up with that title for this section. And then you've got some things you'd like to share. But like I was saying earlier, the principles and the description and the way that Sid shared so often would go way above my head. I didn't understand what he was talking about. It was just, I'd get lost, but in a beautiful way. But then he also had this beautiful practical way of sharing that was really helpful for everyday life. And I feel like that's where the kind of the logic bit comes in. It's a logic that points to why we're free. And the logic that I woke up to is something that actually, when you heard it spoken about like that, it kind of restricted, you felt restricted. So for me, when I heard that all feelings come alive and are created through thought, that the feeling in which I lived in was created from thought, it was like a revelation for me, because I felt the feelings that I experienced came from other people. They came from my past, they came from the situation, the circumstance, they came from my personality, which I thought was something again separate. And when I heard it spoken about as this power of thought that creates feeling or experience or reality within all of us, moment to moment, I saw that what I'd been afraid of was my own mind. I hadn't been afraid of, social gatherings. Like the social gathering in itself didn't give me a feeling. The feeling in which I lived in was very much coming from the way I thought about it, which was how my sister used to love it when we'd all get together as a family, or like she loved parties, she's very expressive. Whereas for me, I'd be like, oh God, I wish I didn't have to be here. I'm dying inside. I hate this. So we had a very different experience of the same circumstance. And I thought that was because she was a confident person and I was a shy person. I didn't see at that time at all that my experience of shyness was created from thought. Her experience of confidence was created from thought. And I feel like my journey since then has been seeing that all life, all reality, all experience is created from this power we're calling thought, consciousness, mind. These three principles bring to life experience within each of us, which is how we see separate realities, how we each live in a different world, which is how, me and my sister were brought up in the same family, but the world that she saw was very different to the world that I saw. If you ask us about our childhood, it's like listening to two different families. Our stories don't match up in the slightest. And that was where the logic came for me. Like, it makes so much sense that I have felt like I felt because I've thought like I thought. And I didn't understand what thought was, so I continued to have the same kinds of thought, believe the same kinds of thought, and live out of it. And so the principles at that time was just like, oh my goodness, it felt like the most freeing thing. It was like my whole character was in front of me and was up for grabs. I'm like, hang on a minute, that's not true. That's not, I hated that innocently. And like within our family, I was often described as the shy, insecure one. She's really shy, she's really insecure, almost introduced like that so that I wouldn't have to speak. But I can see how we all bought into a collective story of who Jenny was. And on the 3 days training, it was like, I described it at the time as I suddenly got to be an observer of what I'd created in a really neutral way. And I think that's the logic. That's the logic that woke me up to the freedom to the power of mind, which is way beyond anything I can describe or know with my intellect. Any of us can. And how that then showed up practically in life was that with the knowledge that my reality was created from within, suddenly I was more able to be in the world without freaking out as much. I didn't have to try and manage and control my circumstance and situation in the same way I used to, because I used to avoid certain things so I could avoid certain feelings. But I remember on that 3 days, and I've just seen Auntie Susan, Sue was on that 3 days with me back in 2005. I remember the thought coming into my mind, well, how can you lay in bed and get totally lost in insecurity and anxiety about the idea of talking in public? Like, I just remember that coming to my mind. I'm like, so you're laying in bed, you're perfectly safe, but you're in the experience of anxiety and fear. Where does a feeling come from? And I can see how I'd started to unravel the misunderstanding I'd been living out of. The logic had started to wake up something deep within me. The sense, the common sense of this had started to wake something up within me, which has then allowed me to go beyond the limiting thoughts that I lived out of, go beyond the limitation of what I thought was possible. And I remember giving a workshop, which Dave and Lisa actually attended about, I think it was in 2014 with Dick and Bettinger. And it was the first time I think my whole family had attended. So, and also my mum's best friend was there. And she'd known me since I was born because her son was born in the same hospital. And her and my mum had been friends my whole life. And at the end of the first day, she sat down at dinner with us and she said, I couldn't hear anything for the first half of the day. She goes, I just could not believe that shy little Jenny was sat up on the stage speaking in front of 80 people. She said, I could not believe that. Because you used to hide behind your mum's legs. Like, you just... And after that, when I went to bed, I got quite reflective and I was like, wow, how much have I taken for granted the new life or the new world that I was seeing? How much had I taken for granted that I could sit on a stage and speak to a group of people? How much had I taken it for granted that I could go into a shop on my own and take some clothes back? Like, things that used to be terrifying to me, which maybe are every day for anyone else, I was suddenly able to do, and I'd taken it for granted. And I remember the next day sitting again on this stage with Dickon and just being so filled with gratitude for coming across this, for going beyond what I'd thought was possible for me at the age of 23. And I burst into tears in front of everyone. I sat there for a few minutes. It took Dickon a few minutes to notice because I'm a quiet crier. And I just said, so I'm gonna have to stop everyone and tell you like what's going on for me. Like, I'm just so filled with gratitude for coming across this and for getting to live this life now, and to go to get totally anxious before maybe a retreat, or get totally anxious before doing that workshop with Dickon, but know what that anxiousness is and then still live and still do. Whereas before, my feelings dictated everything about what I could and couldn't do. With the logic and the understanding, you suddenly realize that feelings are telling us about our own mind, not about the world or what we should do. And that puts us in a position to be able to do things that we'd love to do that we didn't think were possible.
And to think again.
And to think again and again and recreate. And then as I was sat there kind of in this gratitude, crying in front of all these people, I think Beck was there as well. I remember this moment, and I just suddenly fell in love with my family in a way that it was like I got to see my family without all my ideas of who my family were. And all there was love. And then suddenly it was for the room, and then it was for the world. And I just sat on this stage, just streaming with tears, just completely filled up. And it was like getting to see the world with, I guess, newborn eyes. And I realised how my beliefs and my ideas about who people are and my stories of who the characters of my life are can so easily get in the way of my connection and love for them. And just for that short space of time, sat in front of all of those people, it's like I got to see without all of the ideas and thoughts and clutter. And that's the power of logic. That's the power of seeing the nature of something. So much grander and bigger than what we think, what we believe. And like I've said, over the last 16 years in May, I think 2005, like I've got to think again and again, and I've got to create other whole constructs of who I think I am, buy into it, live out of it, only for that to collapse. And I've then seen in other people, we're fluid. We're not fixed. We're not types of people or characters. There's movement and change possible. And I used to kind of think what Sydney Banks experienced could kind of only comes about every 2,000 years or something, like that kind of huge experience, like I could never have. And then I realized that was a limit. I've got no idea. Like Sid was an ordinary man and he had this enlightenment experience, and his message was that that's possible for everyone. And he used to chuckle and say, we're all enlightened, we just don't know it. And I think that's the beauty of starting to see the logic of the reality we see is constructed of this power of thought, and it will be brought to life as if it's true through consciousness. And it will look true, and we will argue it and we'll defend it. But this seems to allow us to know there's something before. When we step before our beliefs and become that observer, we get so many more options. Our relationships change. So there's a logic and practicality to this that's kind of in some ways graspable. But then what it seems to open you up to is like, I don't know anything. This is so beyond anything I can put into words. There's a deep intelligence to this that's beyond anything I can express. But I'm an expression of that. And so are all of we. We all are.
All of we, I like that. It's good England.
And I think that's the message and the promise within this is that when I look back, I know that I'd like tiny scratch the surface of what this was, but it changed my life. And then I've got to kind of continue to learn and change and evolve. But like we were saying, like with alignment to what's true, with alignment to logic, change doesn't take time. It happens in a moment. And I think we're so bought into the idea of time and life and character. Well, I've been like this for so long, it's going to take so long to try and get over it. It's not true. Change happens with alignment, which isn't in time. It's instantaneous. And I think that we don't realise how everything we see is through our beliefs, is through thought. It's coloured. Roger described it as having glasses with scratches all over. And the principles is a way of kind of cleaning your glasses to get a clearer view. And I didn't see before how obscured my view was. It was totally, totally innocent. And the suffering that then was created in my life was logical because of how I thought. And it wasn't a judgment thing. But it made so much sense. Oh, no wonder you felt like you felt. Because you've thought like you've thought. And it was so simple. And like I've often said, then after about 6 or 7 months of being around this, I'd kind of got a bit arrogant, like, yeah, I know this stuff now. How can anyone feel insecure? It's just thought. It's just thought, and I got really humbled, like totally lost in thought again for a little while. But one of the things, again, I loved about Roger, he said, wherever you go, you take your understanding with you. So he used to speak about levels of consciousness being like an elevator. And, you know, sometimes you seem to be on the top floor and you just see so vast and so wide. And then sometimes you're on the bottom floor and you can only see what's right in front of you. But he said, you take your understanding with you wherever you go on that. And I've seen that to be true again and again. Like I can be totally bought into an experience and it will feel and look so real, but there's always like this, I kind of know this isn't true. I can hold on tight for quite a long time. I'm quite impressed with my ability to still hold on to things sometimes. But there's a natural letting go, because there's a logic and a nature to us. It's how we're built. And I think the other metaphor that Roger used is almost like our well-being, our wholeness is like a beach ball that bobs around and sometimes sort of goes under. But what we've innocently done with our own minds is, as soon as our beach ball went under, we'd be like pressing it down. We'd be thinking about our thinking, trying to make it come up again, but not realizing we're innocently pushing it down. And he said, but the beautiful thing about a beach ball is if you take your hands off it, it will just bounce back up. And I remember thinking, wow, it can't be that easy. But then actually then having the experience of it, it is. When our mind falls onto something else other than at what we think our problem is, we then experience that. And it happened before I knew the principles. Like you often say, if you're watching a funny movie, for that hour and a half, you're just lost in the movie laughing. Where was all my anxiety and shyness and eating disorders? Like they didn't exist in that moment. So that's where I feel the logic comes in, to wake us up, to then get an experience of this deeper freedom that can't be put into words. So that was kind of the reason behind this section. I wanted to kind of make it clear what we meant when we were talking about logic and why we were using that term.
I just want to talk a bit about perhaps the way I see it personally, how we've missed this logic. Because when you start to wake up to it, you really realize it's so simple. But I can understand why we have missed this logic. It does make a lot of sense to me. We live in creation. We get to experience creation. Everywhere you look, you are observing creation. And so when people show up at some point in time with a worry or an anxiety, and a psychologist or a doctor starts to analyze this, what do we go and study? We go and study the creation, what's been created. Of course, it's a logical place to look. Okay, and so if we're a medically minded person, and we're trying to help an individual who is struggling psychologically, where would be a logical place to look? Well, it would be, let's have a look within the head. Let's have a look within the brain. This is where it all seems to take place. All seems to take place within the brain. And then as we've progressed with sciences, we've come up with ideas, we discovered genes. All of a sudden, we've got the blueprint for the body. This is why you are like you are. It's your genetics. Well, you know, your father, he was a depressed man. He suffered with depression. You too carry the genetics of depression. And at one point it was said that genetics determine your whole personality. All of a sudden, the human being, the beingness is reduced down to a string of amino acids and chemicals and stuff like that. And so, of course, when we start looking in this direction, we start looking to the physical, we start looking to the creation, we're missing it. But this is totally logical. I completely and utterly understand why we would look at the physical. It makes an awful lot of sense. It makes an awful lot of sense from a materialist worldview, which is what the Western world especially is very much bought into, is a materialist worldview. I was diagnosed with chemical imbalances in my brain. That's why I struggled with depression. That's why I used to get angry. I was diagnosed with chemical imbalances. I was medicated for it. I was told that's why I had depression. I had this chemical imbalance. Some people have been told it's their upbringing. Again, a world thing, a worldly thing, and a thing that's taken place. Form, creation. I remember having a conversation with my Jen's good friend Rob, who was a deeply intelligent man. He was pushing me. He came up the Lake District. We live in the Lake District, and he was coming up to see us. So he was in the car, and we were driving up, and he was asking me, I'm writing a book. I've been writing it for bloody ages. And he was pushing me on my logic. And he asked me, he was asking, what would you say to somebody who says that consciousness is created by the brain, by the coming together of cells? And we had a really nice conversation about this, and he was pushing me, but deeply, I mean, this lad, he's clever. He's far smarter than I am. And for he kept on pushing me on my logic. And he asked me, he said, you know, what would you say to somebody who says that it's all created by the brain? I said, well, I'd have to ask that person what created the brain. What intelligence created the brain? And he said, well, what about neurological pathways? The firing of neurons, the bridging of neurological pathways, as to be, you know, the brain is creating this experience, surely. I just asked him, I said, well, what I would ask that person is, what's telling the brain to create the neurological pathway? The brain is totally useless without a force behind it to tell it what to do. Surely the brain is a ball of fat. But in the way that the West has studied science, it's like it's split, it's made consciousness or spirit a very mysterious place. It's like, so because it can't explain it, it's kind of just done away with it for now. And for now, we're going to look at the physiology. Or we'll just assume that consciousness is an emergent from the brain. So let's just study the brain. But what is it that does tell the brain to create a new neurological pathway? What is it that tells the brain to fire a neuron? What is it that tells the brain to do anything? What is it that tells the brain to tell anything? You know, if I want to, I always use this as an example, I don't know why. If I want to get this pen from here to over there, it takes an energy exchange. There's energy goes into it, there's energy required. What is the energy that's telling the brain what to do? We must start to look at that, because that comes before the form, that comes before the creation. Now, when I say energy, we have an idea as to what energy is, but we must ask ourselves, do we? What is energy? It's nothing that anybody can explain. It's inexplicable, is energy. What is energy? I work with energy. What are you working with? Everything's created from energy. What's everything created from? Energy, what's that? So for so long we've looked at creation, trying to find truth within creation, trying to explain why people are like they are. Oh, it's your upbringing, it's your genetics, it's it's the chemical imbalance within your brain, Dave. Now, I lived a life as an angry man for a lot of years. You could say that those pathways were well and truly walked down. Very well trodden neurological pathways. But in one moment, in one new thought, in one new realization, gone. Whole new experience, new chemicals. I'm no longer flooded with adrenaline and cortisol like I was once diagnosed with and therefore medicated for. All of a sudden, my adrenaline and cortisol's just returned to a normal, balanced state. Nothing's happened in the world. My body's still my body. But after one new thought, one new realization, my chemical structure changed. And I'm no longer walking down the neurological pathway of anger and depression and judgment and hatred for people. The logic that we've lived with in this materialist worldview has led us down the wrong path, completely and utterly innocently. Because of course we live in creation. So of course we're going to look to creation to try and understand creation. You cannot understand creation by looking at creation. Matter does not create matter. You can't smash this cup and get more physical object. It's finite. We must start to integrate back in the missing part of understanding, and that is the spirit or the energy, soul, God, Allah, Buddha, Jehovah, mind, quantum field, source, Tao, Hashem. We must start to bring back into our awareness the consciousness that we are, that creates. As long as we are blindly staring at creation, we are missing it. As long as we are blindly looking at our experience, we're missing it. As Jenny said, everybody is living in their own experience. This was fundamental. This changed my life when I started to wake up to this point. Every single human being on earth sees a different world. 7.7 billion different perspectives of a world. 7.7 billion different dreams, dream states of a world. 7.7 billion. That's just human. That's not taking into account any other organism. That's not taking into account any other expression of life. I stopped being a tree surgeon and stopped cutting down trees when I realized consciousness is awareness. Awareness is experience. Experience is a reality. Oh, trees experience reality. They are just like me. As soon as I realized that, I realized that they are living in an experience of reality that is very different to the one that a human being experiences. They experience a tree reality. I have no idea what it looks like, but they experience. And it was obvious once I started to become aware of this fact, when just by observing how a tree responded to me kind of pollarding it or pruning it, it responded, it reacted, it healed. If I ever had two trees growing alongside each other and I felled one out, this one didn't have branches on this side. It was aware of its neighbor. It cooperated with it. It didn't try and overtake it and beat it down. And trees don't live in a competitive world. Nature is not one of competition. As much as we have been led to believe it is, it truly isn't. It's a cooperative state. We look at things from the personal point of view, but if you look at nature from a larger, more open, expansive point of view, you realize that it is a cooperative state. It's the human being's ego that sees competition. This is why the human being thinks that nature is something to dominate and something to overcome. Because it's in competition with itself. It's motor neurons disease, effectively. That's what the mass consciousness of humanity has been creating. But if we continue to look at what is creating, we what is created, we're missing the point of what is creating. Everybody is creating a different reality right now. It's 57 windows open up on this screen right now. There are no two windows looking back experiencing the same conversation. That there's no two people on this call experiencing the same words. Different words mean different things to different people. They're experiencing a different reality. There may be people here who are going, oh, come on, 3 days of this shite. There may be people going, oh, there's 3 days of this. There may be people going, this makes sense. There may be people going, what the hell is this fucking idiot talking about? All of it's different. None of it's right. None of it's wrong. It's just different experiences. And you only have to look at your own relationships and the people close to you to realize you don't always see eye to eye. Of course you don't. You see different worlds. But we get very attached to the world that we've created. If it's true, if this is true, that we are all seeing different worlds, we're all living in a different reality, we're all generating a different reality, we're all dreaming up a different reality. If that is true, and there is truly 7.7 billion people on Earth, whose is the true reality? Who sees the real world? Something to have a think about. If we're all seeing a different world, whose reality is the truth? Who sees the true reality? Does anybody see the true reality? Or does everybody perceive what appears to be a true reality? Perhaps the answer to this question might explain why people have described reality as an illusion. If people start to wake up and realize that reality is truly an illusion, what would that do for the world? What would that do for an individual who is suffering to realize that their suffering is ultimately an illusion of their mind? All suffering. $7.7 billion different realities walking the face of the earth in just human. Never mind the ants. Every single ant in a colony experiences a different reality. It sees its own world. This is a marvelous thing to start to ponder. What is reality? Where is reality? What is this creator? Who is the creator? Oh, we are all the creator. Dreaming the dream of life, but not realizing we're dreaming. Everybody's dreaming a different dream. Everybody's dream looks entirely real to them. Looks entirely real. Everybody's free. The logic has to be the reintegration of spirit into the physical incarnation. To understand the body cannot move, cannot do a single behavior. We've studied behaviors. Let's try and change behavior. Let's work with behavior of children. Let's try and change your behavior. Where does behavior come from? It has to come from a thought. Thought creates feelings, creates behavior. It's pointless looking at behavior. It's too late. People's behavior can't change until their minds change. To start to see this 7.7 billion separate realities, and to start to get a sense that everybody is seeing a different world. To start to realize there is no such thing as a real world. I live in the real world, do you? Come back to the real world, Dave. You can't speak like that. Come back to the real world. Whose real world? Your real world, your real world, your real world, my real world. Whose real world? I think what you're trying to say to me is think like me. I can't. I can only ever think as I think. It's a beautiful thing. Nobody can make us think anything. Nobody can teach us anything. Nobody can teach anybody anything. We realize. We just realize continuously throughout our life. It's like a fountain. You could cut. I think people have spoken about the fountain of knowledge. Is that what you think?
I think so.
It's just coming to me now. The fountain of knowledge. You are the fountain of knowledge. Everybody's the fountain of knowledge. It's the only way knowledge comes into the world is from this fountain of consciousness, this fountain from within. Where from this withinness, this fountain of consciousness is born realities and new ideas. I can say the same thing as like when I was studying mathematics and my teacher would come round and I'd speak to him and I go, is it like this? And he'd go, no, it's like this, Dave. It's like this. And he's trying to teach me. He's trying to teach me. And I'm listening. 5 times later, is it like this? No, Dave, it's like this. 10 times later, I go, is it like this? And he go, yeah, it's like that, Dave. I had to realize he could only guide. He could only take me so far. I had to be the one to realize from within myself. And you realize that's the only way we've ever learned. Everything we have learned is a realization that we have dreamt up. Now, this realization is that we're hopefully trying to guide people towards is a universal realization. It's a universal realization, universal because it applies to all people. It applies to all beings. It applies to all things. There is nobody who's exempt. You can believe you're exempt. You can believe you're different. Oh, what if I'm different? What if I'm the one person who's different to all this? You can't be. It's a universal realization, which is why it's a logic. And it's a logical realization. As much as it's spiritual, it's logical. You realize that reality is a state of mind. What is mind? Back to that what is energy thing. Back to what is God. What is source. It's not something the intellect can ever wrap its finger around. It can never understand it. The intellect can never understand it. It cannot know it. It can believe it knows it, but it cannot know it. But we can wake up to it. It can be woken up to in a moment. like Jenny said, this does not take time. It takes alignment.
You were speaking, it just reminded me of when we were working out in South Africa, we had this group of teenagers, and we'd been talking to them about the principles and sharing a little bit about Sydney Banks, and one of them was like, hang on a minute, how did Sydney Banks know this stuff if he hadn't gone to university and he hadn't studied? And I remember just saying to them, well, how do you think all this knowledge and information got into books in the first place? Like, where did it come from? And you were like, I bet they're all thinking Google.
You know they were thinking Google.
But you could see them for a moment step back and realize that at some point what was written in that book didn't exist, and then someone had a realization and then they wrote about it, they learned about it, they figured it out. That all knowledge has been born from that place, that fountain of knowledge, of consciousness, from mind. But we get so caught in looking at creation, and there's some incredible things written. We've been really getting into reading just recently and reading different books, and there's so many people pointing in a direction. But to know that it's not in the words, it's within you. I used to say, this message is so powerful, and if it was in the words, all we'd need to do was write a beautiful email explaining it all and send it out to the world, and everyone would realize it and the world would change. But it isn't in the words, which is how there was 30 odd people in that first course that Sue and I attended, and some people were impacted and some people weren't. I know that when, again, Auntie Sue was there, we went to see Sydney Banks speak in London, and there was a man there from Scotland who just argued with Sid quite a lot. And then I was just sat there like, this answers everything. This is it. Like, this is, how can there be an argument in this? We were listening to the same words. We were in the same room. And I love that the insight I had through listening to Sid came from within me. The insights that you guys have will come from within you. They will not come from us. Like, we've read some books, we've been reading to each other at night and stuff, and sometimes you're like, oh my God, that statement, really? I'm like, really, that statement? Like, the words don't mean that to me. I don't hear that message. We've read the same book a couple of times now, and I'm hearing it totally differently. It's not in the words, it's not in the form. It's where it's pointing to. And we had a lovely message this morning from Kate, who shared on our one before last retreat. And we recorded her yesterday. She does something called Kate's Reflections. And she came and saw us almost a year ago now with her daughter, who was a school refuser. And she'd been struggling with anxiety, and trying to get Georgia to school was like a full-time job for Kate. And she felt like she was really neglecting her family. And she was at her wit's end, really, when she came to see us. And she gave this beautiful talk yesterday. And she was talking about how we have all this baggage about life that we carry with us, thoughts, beliefs, all these ideas. And she turned up to us wanting us to fix Georgia. That was why she came. And over the 4 days that they were with us, like, Kate just heard. Georgia wasn't that interested. Georgia wasn't listening so much. She wouldn't even come in the house a couple of times. She sat in the car. And one of the things Dave said to Kate yesterday on this call was, you arrived with a load of baggage and you left with Georgia. And Kate texted this morning to say that was such a beautiful way of explaining it. She arrived with all her ideas and beliefs of who Georgia was, what the problem was, who she was, what she was capable of, who Georgia was, what Georgia was capable of. And she said, and I left with Georgia and I found myself. And she was speaking today how she has no idea kind of how all these people seem to find her, but people are coming out of the woodwork. Like, a friend from 30 years has contacted her. She said, we weren't even that good friends 30 years ago. We're not friends on the Facebook stuff. She said, I don't really do Facebook. I don't know how she contacted me. She said, but she has. She went and had a sports massage, and then it just so happened that the person doing it, her child struggles with going to school and anxiety. And I think that's again where the ripple effect starts to happen. Like, Kate saw beyond, she saw from within herself, and now she shares from that place. And she said when they got home, you were talking about behaviour, Georgia's behaviour got worse. Like, she totally upped the ante.
We said she might, didn't we?
But Kate said she knew that Georgia was fine, that she just didn't realise it. And if she could keep sight of that for Georgia when she couldn't do it for herself, at some point it would change, and she changed. There's a whole, on our YouTube channel, which is Freedom Thinking, she has a whole series of reflections of her time over the last year of learning about this and the transformation that's happened. But her and Georgia sat on the same couch listening to Dave and I for 4 days. Kate heard, Georgia didn't listen. The most fun Georgia had was when she refused to get out of the car. So Kate came and sat with me in tears, sent Dave down. The next thing, Georgia's like 30 or 40 foot up a tree in a harness. And I'm like, oh my goodness, we're not insured for this. But Dave's like, okay, you're terrified about coming into the house to talk to us, but you're not terrified about being put in a harness and sent up this tree. Georgia's very into climbing, and I think that was the only reason she came, because there's a brilliant climbing wall in there, Kendall. But you can see that they both sat and listened to the same words. But Kate heard and Georgia didn't. But through Kate realising that the nature of us, the logic of life, she now sees a very different Georgia. And now Georgia sees herself very differently. She's back at school, she's doing all kinds of things that she never thought were possible for her. And it's so easy to get caught up in thinking someone else has got our answer. Someone else has got what we need to make us feel better, or they've got more knowledge, or the way that they share is better. And I've done that many times. I've heard someone share from their understanding and like, I want to teach like that. I want to be like them. Or I've kind of gone and learned something for myself and thought that was the way to share this. But the beautiful thing is that within this gift of thought, I feel like we get humbled again. We think we know something, we'll get humbled. But then we learn. And I feel like it's that every time I think I know what this is, it slips through my fingers and I have to think again. And I think Sid would often, like, someone would write a book and be like, take that out of print, that's not it. Like, he knew that as soon as we had too much form around this, we create a thing in the world. It's not it. It can't be put into words. The awareness that's before, the beforeness of us can't be put into words. It doesn't have form. And we think in terms of words and form. But like I said right at the beginning, like, this awareness transcends all of that, all limitation, because limitation is in the world of form. It doesn't exist in what creates. It effortlessly creates. And like we've said, there's been a few times where we got to work with an incredible group of people in a charity in South Africa. The charity is called Africa Tikkun. And we kind of went in quite uneducated, really. Like I've said to Dave now, like, before we go and work with a community, let's not go in so much ignorance. Like, let's do a little bit of research beforehand. But we learned so much from working with this group. Township called Mufulweni, which is just part of Khayelitsha in South Africa, near Cape Town. And some of the stories that we were told, you're like, how can that be your life? Like, it was insane, some of the things that they were living through and had lived through. Completely different lives from anything either of us had experienced. but when we could finally get them speaking to us, maybe you'll tell that story, but what came through was just this love and this lightness of spirit and this givingness and this willingness to put down their beliefs and listen to us. And I loved it. On the second day, we had a new lady join, and she said, well, we always start our trainings with an icebreaker. And again, that was our learning. Like, why did we ask, how do you normally start your trainings? Why did we just go in with our way? So then their icebreaker was, you've got to stand, everyone individually has to stand at the front and spell your name with your body. At this point, I'm like, I don't want to have to do that. That seems embarrassing. I'm like, what are you here to teach? Okay, you better do this. They were all there, like totally moving and getting into it and laughing. And they said we were like robotic. But we got in, we stood at the front.
People.
We tried our best.
That was awesome.
Okay. But within that, we all just fell about laughing, and it broke the ice completely. And what I feel like I learn again and again and again is the fact that this already is true and exists within every single being, regardless of if they've heard the three principles. Whereas when I first came across it, I thought I needed to educate everyone on the three principles. But what I've loved is being able to be around people in life who already live from that place of they have that realization within them, even if they don't have those words, they see it in a different way. And we learned so much about the nature of resilience and spirit and the ability to overcome and transcend circumstance. But then they also said that the training completely changed the culture in which they were working, because they had a lot of division with different ethnicities. Yeah, people coming from different areas of Africa and their beliefs about what people from that country are like. Like, they had so many beliefs to see through, and what seemed to happen over the 3 days, they became less full of belief, and they got to see one another, and it changed their communication. And we got to go back 6 months later, and we had like an extra 10 people who had chosen to come to the training, because they said there was something about these people that had been through our training that they wanted some of that. What is it that these people know that we don't know? But it is something that's already up and running, exists for every single being right now. We're not giving you anything. We want to remind you of something that you already are. And as we see that, I think there's a couple of books that are called like Beyond Belief. We go beyond the belief that it could be true, and we know we go beyond the belief, and we see it for ourselves.
You could say before belief.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it has been, the last few years with you have been fascinating for me, because getting to do a lot of traveling and meeting people from different backgrounds, different parts of the planet, and being out in Nepal after the earthquakes, when we went out, you, me and Rudy went out, and talking through translators to Nepalese people. I had this beautiful translator called Joshna. She was 15. Adore this girl. And we'd be speaking, and she would just go, as you're speaking, she was very shy. And as I was speaking to her, she would just be going, that's true. She'd be like, and then she'd say it, and then she'd be going, that's true as well. That's true. Like, you could see her just lighting up as she shared this message with these people. And then these people, you could see the faces changing in these people. And then, so you tell me what they said, like they're just speaking about what they just realized. And it was like, you could see that this message doesn't care about language. What's true is true for all people. It doesn't matter who they are, their background, how rich they are, what they do for a job, what religion they are, what color their skin. We're all the same. And I think this became really apparent at that meeting in Mufflewaney Township when we worked with those people. And I've mentioned this story numerous times, but when we first sat down, they didn't speak to us. They wouldn't speak to us. And then this coloured lady came up to us afterwards, and I only found out she was coloured because she told me she was coloured. People say, "Oh, you can't say coloured, Dave." No, that's what Susan called herself, coloured, and I'm not going to disrespect her by calling her another name. Susan was a coloured lady. And she said, "Did you notice the other people wouldn't speak to you?" We were like, "Yeah, all day. Nobody said a bloody word apart from you, Susan." Susan spoke a lot. I love Susan. And she said, "Yes, because you're white. They're black. They don't trust you. If you want them to speak, you must get them to gain your trust. Good luck," effectively. I'm like, "Thanks, Susan." And we went home. We came back that next morning, and Cape Town's bizarre. The moment it rains, everybody stops driving, just stops dead. So it had started to rain on it. So all the traffic suddenly just went, "Yeah. Oh no, we can't drive in this." So we're like, come on. We're going to be late. And all of a sudden it hit us. Oh shit, we've got this problem. The black people don't want to talk to the white people. And so eventually we got there. They were all sat there waiting, weren't we? We sat down, and I just said, "Right, I want to start with something. There's a big white elephant in this room. It's Jenny and I. What do you see in us as white people?" And all of a sudden these black people started to speak, and they told us what they thought of us. And it was things like, "You have easy lives. You are rich. You don't have drink and drug problems. You don't end up in prison. You don't get stopped by the police." What else was there?
You're rich? You said rich?
Yeah. I mean, it was just so many things.
It's about half an hour's worth, wasn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of finger pointing. "You white people." And it was so beautiful, because at the end of it, I said, "Is that really? Oh, you don't have drug problems. You don't have drink problems." I probably mentioned that. It was so beautiful, because at the end of it, I said, "Is that really what you see in us?" I said, "Because I've done every single one of those things apart from be rich." "You've been to prison." "Yes, I've been to prison. Yes, I've had problems with drink, drugs. Yeah, I haven't had an easy life. I've struggled through an awful lot of my life." We're all the same. We just keep on looking at the form. And with that, you see these people relax. Now, we did 3 days with these people, because 3 days is a good amount of time. If we ever work with people, we always try and aim for 4 days, because 4 days is brilliant. But we had 3 days with these people, and at the end of it, they were coming up to us, and we all just fell in love. When I think about them, I'm thinking about them now, and I'm just filled with love. I deeply love these people. They're some of my fondest memories. And they were saying things like, "You are my brother and you are my sister. You must come and stay with me next time you come." They hugged us, and they were saying, "We feel so powerful. We feel so powerful." Good. You are. You are the creator of your world. You are the creator of your life. You are the creator. You are the infinite force of creation. You should feel powerful, because you are. The only thing that limited was a belief. The only thing that separated the black people and the white people in the beginning was a belief. Beliefs. Thoughts that we believe, ideas that we believe, ideas we hold on to, ideas we think that make us who we are and what makes us good. Sydney Banks said there is no peace to be found in beliefs. No peace to be found in beliefs. There isn't. We defend beliefs. We go to war over beliefs. We kill people over beliefs. We suffer because of beliefs. We suffer psychologically because of beliefs. Thoughts. We believe the reality that we see is real until it changes and we become aware of that. It's been such a privilege to work with people from all those different backgrounds. And it's been such a privilege to wake up to this in my lifetime. But to know it's only a beginning. It's only a new beginning. It's not a goal. It's not an end. It's a new beginning. There is no goal. You cannot come to the end of awareness and awakening. You can't. It's an infinite thing. People wake up to this within themselves and they go, oh, what the hell? This is amazing. Welcome. You've just walked through the door. You're just at the beginning now. You will go through life and you will continue to wake up and you will continue to learn and you will continue to see new. You'll continue to drop beliefs. You'll continue to become aware of things that you've carried around, and it's just a new beginning. We're all at the beginning. Everybody on earth is at the beginning. There's a quote in the Lost Chapters of Thomas by Jesus when he was asked, "Tell us, Jesus, how will our end be?" Asking about death. And his response to that is, "I take it from your question you found the beginning, that you ask about the end." Blessed is he who takes his place in the beginning, for he will know the end and will not taste death. The beginning and the end are the same place. It's an infinite thing. There is no beginning and there is no end. We are continuously looking at creation. Creation's finite. The body will go back to the earth. It will decompose. The earth will go back to the universe. Universe, uni, one, singular.
What's his other way of saying that? The age-old triple question.
Yeah, that age-old triple question of where do we come from? Where are we going? And who are we? It's the same question, effectively. You come from the light. You're going towards the light. You are the light. Light being a word used to describe consciousness. You are born of consciousness. You're going back to consciousness. You are consciousness. Everything is that. Ultimately, there is nothing to be afraid of. Ultimately, there is nothing to be afraid of. Everything is consciousness. You are all things. Everybody is all things. Everything is all things. There is nothing to be afraid of in that. The mind creates fear. Thoughts create fear. Thoughts create separation. Thoughts create identity. Thought creates ego. We all get lost in this. I totally get lost in. You can't get life wrong. People are so afraid of life. People are so afraid of death. It's because we are always continuously identifying with the form, the body, and who we think we are, which is a creation. It's a ball of memories. It's everything we think we believe in, everything we stand for, everything we agree with and everything we disagree with, everything we'd fight for. It's our ideas of suppression. I remember that being a big one. I mentioned this on the last retreat, and I mentioned it a few times, but when Jenny and I went to a soup kitchen, I met a man there who'd had his face beaten up. He was massive. It's a bit like a brick shit house. Towered over me. I'm 6 foot. He must have been 6'5", 6'6". Massive man. I would not have wanted to blacken his eyes. He would have ripped me apart. But I asked him what was wrong with his face. How did that come about? And he said he was beaten. And I looked at this man. I was thinking, who the hell would beat you? I said, what happened? And he said, 4 men the other night came about 4 o'clock in the morning and beat my face and took my things. I said, wow, that must have been terrifying for you. And he went, scared? You'd be scared? Looking down at me and pointing. I said to him, yeah, I think I would be scared, yes. And he looked at me and said, I will never be afraid of my brothers. The only person I need to be afraid of is you. I shit myself. He was in a room of 300 homeless people, different gang members in there from different gangs, just sitting there simmering. You could see they weren't taking their eyes off each other. It was parts of the room were quite uncomfortable, and there was parts where people was playing cards and chess and stuff. And I remember saying, why, what have I done? So all that came out of my mouth. What have I done? What did I do wrong? And he went, you white man, you suppress me. You suppress us. I didn't really know what to say at that point. But I was stood there face to face with him. And all that came out of my mouth was, I'm sorry, but the suppression you talk about, I can't see it. Please, could you show it to me? And he said, what do you mean, can I show it to you? I said, please, can you please point to it, touch it? You're going to have to touch it. I'll point to it, please. I'm sorry. And if I can see it, I will do something about it. What do you mean, can I touch it? Can I point to it? I'm going to need you to. And it was at that point, I can't remember exactly how it came about, but I started to have a conversation with him about what we're sharing today, how all experience, how life itself is an experience. Experience is created within the mind, and that is your reality. Was that effect? About 20 minutes later, this man just fell into this chair and burst into tears. And he just looked at me and went, my brother, you've set me free. I said, my brother, no, you set you free. You did it. And he leant forward and he hugged me and we fell in love. Both of us just fell into this space of love. Complete and utter unification. And it hit me when we went out. Our friend who, she came out and she was so disheartened by the whole soup kitchen thing. 300 black homeless people, 2 homeless white people. She said, the problem with South Africa is too big. Jen and I were like, no, it's not. It's not. She's like, but look at it. It's not too big. The problem South Africa faces isn't too big. if you look at South Africa and you look at it from the physical standpoint, the material worldview, yeah, you know, if you've got to get people into equal jobs, equal housing, you know, and you need to create all this stuff, sort out politics, sort out the corruption. Yeah, it looks massive. But if you realize what it's created from, and you realize that in that one man, a generationally held belief died in a moment. Doesn't matter how long this belief has been held, it can die in a moment, because a belief is nothing. It's a thought. It's not a fact. And we said, all South Africa needs to do is change its mind about one another. All people need to do is think differently about one another, and that South Africa has to change, because it's only held in place by thought. This goes for the whole world. And this is why in Buddhism and Hinduism and other cultures, they say, don't try and change the world. Stop trying to change the world. You can't do it. Change yourself and the world changes. When you start showing up in the world different, people around you start showing up different.
It's like when you said you went for your first night out after waking up to this.
Yeah. The first night out, I went out and didn't get into an argument or a fight. I thought Kendal was full of dickheads. It had one massive dickhead in there. But you realise this is what we have here, what Sid brought into the world, and many other people. Is something that can create a unified world. Is something that can change this world. And all we're doing is realizing the nature of mind. And you realize it's only the nature of mind that keeps the world stuck as it is. There's this, how long we got? Is it lunchtime?
Yeah.
It's lunchtime, and we'll come back to that afterwards.
Well, after lunch, we're gonna, we'd love to hear from anyone who'd like to share. So we're coming back at 2 o'clock.
UK time. An hour and a half.
Yeah, come back at 2. And of course, that questions, observations, and reflections. So any of those things that you'd like to bring to it, because we've done enough talking.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so we'll be back for that, and then at 3:30 we'll have Dickon Bettinger joining us.
Cool. Thank you, everybody.